Hello, everybody. Hope you're well. I'm fine. I want to thank you for all the sharing you've already done. That's fantastic. Hi, Dolores. How are you? Hi, Steve. I see you. Well, my indicator says there are 9 of you here, but oh, there's Avril and Alice Little. Hi, Alice. Nice to see you. And Kay, a good evening to you. Stacy Brennan has joined. Hi, Stacy. Welcome to you. Okay, let's begin because there's a lot to do tonight. I want to start off with a couple of news items not on the major theme. Steve says, the evil twin. There's Rocco. Hey, Rock. Nice to see you. Excited to see you. Or at least to see the indicator that says you're here. Yeah, Rocco Million's one of my favorite people, folks. Anyway, in fact, he's well liked by our whole family, including Bonnie and my daughter, Devora. Carmen says, well, hello there, whippersnapper. Kay hates the new Facebook, as do we all. But anyway, let's get on with the business. I wanted to deal with some news items that quickly came around because they were notable. Common Dreams, an article by Lisa Newcomb, a staff writer there, published today. Averaging 2 per day since being sworn in, Trump has racked up 3,403 conflicts of interest since taking office. That's the official count from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, also known as Coup. 3,403 is an average of more than 2 conflicts per day since being sworn in January of 2017. I've linked to this article so you can see it for yourself. The interesting thing about it, I should share this. I should share this right away. There we go. I think you can see that now. There's a little chart here. There are 88 political events, which include 13 foreign events, held at the properties of Donald J. Trump. There are 503 visits, including 303 visits to golf courses that are owned by Trump. But 503 visits, all told, by President Trump to his businesses, to businesses owned in whole or in part by Trump. There are 130 events held by special interest groups at his properties. 67 foreign trademarks granted to his businesses. 145 foreign officials who visited a business of Donald Trump's, 141 members of Congress who visited a business, of Donald Trump. So, these are violations of the Domestic Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. The president is harnessing the office of the presidency for his own personal gain. How can we trust that he makes decisions in our interest rather than his own? Said Noah Bookbinder, executive director of Coup, on Thursday. In 2016, Trump made the claim that he was going to be too busy to play golf while he was president. He was never going to see Turnberry again. He was never going to see Doral again. He said, I own Doral. I don't think I'll ever see any of the places that I have. I just want to stay in the White House and work my ass off, make great deals. But he's found time to visit his properties hundreds of times, of course. And each time he's visited one of his properties, we, the taxpayers, have paid through the nose. Through the nose. Anyway, the Coup report's highlights include President Trump has more than 500 visits to the properties he owns and profits from. The president's frequent travel to and from his properties has cost American taxpayers well over $100 million. Small potatoes, really, compared to the whole scale of the federal budget, right? But nevertheless, for most of us, a pretty big piece of change. President Trump has made more than 300 visits to the golf courses he owns and profits from, despite saying that he would not have time for golf. That's before he got into the presidency. His insistence on spending time at his properties has resulted in at least millions of dollars in taxpayer money being spent at his properties. 141 members of Congress have patronized his properties. Special interest groups have patronized his properties. Foreign government entities have patronized his properties. 4 government entities from China, Qatar, India, and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, have rented space in Trump's buildings while he served as president. At least 35 tenants lobbied the federal government on policy issues while they were staying at his residence, and he was profiting from their stays. 20 of those 35 pitched the White House or the president personally. 30 or more tenants collected over $8 billion in federal government contracts from 2018 to 2019 alone. That doesn't include 2017 or 2020. At least 17 faced federal investigations on matters including fraud, money laundering, and corruption. Add it all up, and Trump's tenant relationships, I'm quoting from Alexander, a statement by the name of a man, but Dan Alexander, a reporter, who said when you add it all up, and if you add it all up, Trump's tenant relationships create one of the most significant potential conflicts of interest in American history. I don't see where it's potential. I mean, it's a conflict of interest. Quote, President Trump has repeatedly used his office to promote his businesses and grant wealthy paying customers personal access to him, his staff, and those who have his ear, unquote, said Noah Bookbinder, director of Coup. Quote again, it is a gross abuse of public trust, and with each conflict he becomes more complicit in the destruction of the ethical norms that form the cornerstone of a working democracy. So tell me, where are you, Nancy Pelosi? Where are you? Why wasn't this part of the bill of particulars of impeachment for Donald Trump. Here he is profiting from his presidency rather directly, and it's not part of the impeachment effort. Who pulled such a bonehead play on impeachment? Who failed to impeachment for something that he's caught dead to rights about? I mean, dead to rights. Next. There's, of course, the total scandal. And I'll share this one with you too, so you can see it. The total scandal. So this is an article appeared in Common Dreams today also by Jake Johnson. Quote, disgraceful, unquote. Despite mass suffering, GOP senators prepare to leave town without approving COVID relief. They haven't done any COVID relief in Congress since March. They've allowed the HEROES Act not to receive any consideration in the Senate. This, of course, is Senate Republicans. Last week, an additional 1.5 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week, and more than 20 million people across the United States are going hungry. But Senate Republicans are getting ready to leave Washington again. It seems like they just got back. But here they are. They're ready to leave Washington again. I mean, they only got back just after Labor Day, right? 1.5 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week, and more than 20 million across the U.S. are going hungry. Seems to me we want to make them file for unemployment benefits. Senate Republicans are preparing to leave Washington, D.C. for the campaign trail as early as Thursday without approving any legislation to ameliorate nationwide suffering brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and congressional inaction and mismanagement by Donald Trump, the article should have added. On Wednesday, Senate Majority Whip John Thune said senators could skip town for an extended recess ahead of the November 3rd election if the upper chamber approves a House-passed continuing resolution Thursday to keep the government funded through mid-December. Thus, they would avert a looming shutdown. Now, I haven't checked to see whether they passed that bill today in the House. I'm sorry, I haven't checked to see whether they passed it in the Senate. Now, the House has already passed it. Nancy Pelosi passed it. She rejected calls to use the government funding negotiations as leverage to force through official COVID-19 aid, instead expressing, quote, hope, unquote, that Congress could still, quote, reach a bipartisan agreement on coronavirus relief. Now, they might have reached such an agreement if she had shut down the government, but she didn't want to use that leverage. She didn't want to fight over that. She thought she'd lose some political advantage if she shut down the government to insist that people get relief. Somehow she thought that wasn't a good enough excuse to shut down the government and prevent the Republicans from getting what they wanted. So Nancy has done bonehead plays on this from the beginning. She screwed up the CARES Act, didn't provide for sufficient relief. All she had to do was to see that the relief in the CARES Act would last for as long as the coronavirus crisis itself. That's all she had to do. But she would not insist that that get put into the CARES Act while she allowed the Republicans to put in their $4.6 trillion money cannon for the big corporations. She allowed them to have that, which was all they wanted, and she left people out in the cold past a few months, and she left state and local governments out in the cold as well. So the prospects of the Republicans agreeing to a deal before the November election appear vanishingly slim at present, given the refusal of many Republicans in the Senate to approve much-needed spending on state and local aid and expansion of nutrition assistance, SNAP, of course, robust housing relief, and a $600 per week unemployment supplement. So there have been tweets against this, of course, but nothing concrete done because the Democratic caucus allowed Nancy Pelosi to once again have her way instead of replacing her as Speaker right now. While stonewalling on coronavirus aid, Senate Republicans have been perfectly willing to move ahead with business entirely unrelated to the pandemic, from confirming a raft of right-wing federal judges to forming a plan to force through Trump's yet-to-be-named Supreme Court pick ahead of Election Day. So let me get this straight. The Republicans prioritized selecting a successor to RBG before giving relief to the 30 to 40 to 50 million Americans who currently need it. They prioritized their desire to lock up the Supreme Court for themselves and their ideologies and their donors. They prioritized that ahead of coming to a new economic relief deal during the middle of this pandemic. How should we publish them? How should we punish them for that? How should we punish them for prioritizing things in that way? I'll tell you how. They should lose every single Senate race that they have going right now, where there's even a remote chance that a Democrat could win. The publics in those states should vote the Republicans out, punish them severely, turn over the whole Senate to the Democrats so that the Democrats have 61 senators even. There are enough contested races that they could get 61 senators if the Democrats won every one of the questionable ones, every one where the Republicans are on the bubble. That's what should happen, because that, selecting a successor to the Supreme Court, that is the wrong priority right now. The priority was to give the rest of us relief. The Republicans need to be punished for doing what they did here. Of course, you know about Trump trying to push through the confirmation of an unnamed new justice. They've decided to push through the confirmation without even vetting the justice. I mean, they'll vet her, since Trump has said it's going to be a her, but they don't know which of the leading hers it's going to be. But they know they're going to confirm her. They know they're going to confirm her because they know she is going to be a partisan Republican. And that's what they want to confirm, because they're intent on ruining the reputation of the Supreme Court through a power grab and through creating the choice as a nakedly political one. Senator McConnell's been blocking the HEROES Act for 131 days. And 200K people in America have died. This is from a Vanita Gupta tweet. We have to keep in mind it is not 200K, according to the Worldometer site, which I believe is one of the authoritative sites, one of the truly authoritative sites. As of now, as of today, well, today is not over, but as of the count at the moment, 942 more Americans have died. We now have 626 deaths per million. And we have a total of, that's 10 deaths more per million than we see for the UK. We're closing in on Ecuador once again. We're only 7 deaths per million behind Ecuador now. Well, Chile has more deaths per million, Brazil has more deaths per million, and Bolivia has more deaths per million. Spain has more deaths per million, but we're closing in on Spain now. We've been catching up to Spain. Won't be long before we catch them. And Peru, of course, has an outrageous number of deaths per million. Okay, Belgium too, but Belgium hasn't had any substantial increases for ages. They were 852 per million a month ago. Now they're at 858 per million. Hardly any increase compared to ourselves. So that's the story there. I didn't give you the total number of deaths, did I? I was preoccupied with the deaths per million. 207,538. That means we're only 2,500 away from 210,000 deaths. We are likely to make the 210,000 figure before this week is over. That means before the month is over, by September 27th. I'll try to give you a final count before we leave tonight. So she's saying 200K, it's more like 210K. And of course the statement here says, but stacking the courts is all McConnell cares about. His priorities are appalling, as are Donald Trump's. Why isn't he such a hurry to fulfill the court seat, to fill the court seat again? Well, he's told us he's trying to rig the elections with that justice. He wants that justice to be on there because he wants the election to end up in the Supreme Court, and he wants to have a justice there that he's pretty sure he owns. That's what that's about. It's about Donald Trump cheating, of course. So, anyway, the Republicans left town after we had another 1.6 million people go on to UI benefits for the first time. Total number of people on UI benefits now in all programs, 26,044,952. That doesn't include the people who dropped out of the workforce, of course, which we can probably figure are another 10 million by now. 23 million U.S. adults, more than 10% of all adults in the country, reported that their households did not have enough to eat in early September, and around 13 million Americans said they were behind on rent. These data underscore the urgent need for federal policymakers to agree on further robust relief measures, quote unquote, said analysts at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And quote again, the measures enacted earlier this year, such as expanded unemployment benefits and stimulus payments, were successful in mitigating hardship, but were temporary and had significant shortcomings. Without a new relief package, hardship likely will rise and grow more severe, endangering children's long-term health and educational outcomes. So whose fault is that? Well, obviously it's Nancy Pelosi's fault for not holding the Republicans up in March when they really wanted something. But obviously also it's the Republicans' fault because they had no interest in relief for people. They never had any. To the extent they collaborated with Democrats to pass a relief program in March was because they had to do it. They wouldn't have gotten anything otherwise for themselves. But Nancy Pelosi sold their $4.6 trillion money cannon too cheap. She sold it too cheap because she was too busy. She was worried about other things. She didn't care about it. She was worried about running the House by herself because the House wasn't really in session at the time due to COVID. So she and her staff were basically taking care of everything. They didn't consult with people. They didn't get people saying, what about this? What about that? And nobody saw clearly on the Democratic side that there was this $4.6 trillion money cannon. Maybe Pelosi herself didn't even see it. Maybe she was too stupid to see that it was there. Of course, the first day the bill came out, it was possible for Dave Dayen to see the money cannon right there. But maybe Pelosi just didn't see it because she's incompetent. Or maybe she didn't care about it because she doesn't care about relief for people, so she didn't use her bargaining power. But of course, the fact that she had to bargain for it in the first place is due to the Republicans and their poisonous meanness when it comes to doing things for people. We cannot emphasize too heavily the blame that falls on the Republicans for this and the continuing blame in the months since March when they've refused to join with the Democrats to pass anything. So they deserve strong, strong punishment. And on the Democratic side, Nancy Pelosi deserves strong punishment. Are you listening, Shahed Buttar? Make the case to the people of San Francisco that Nancy Pelosi needs to be voted out of office. She is not for the people. She is responsible for an imminent depression in the United States because she failed to force the Republicans into doing something when she had the leverage. And then she arrogantly told people to relax, that in the end, relief would be coming and it would be real relief. And she told reporters, just relax, I'll take care of that. Well, she didn't take care of it. She made a bonehead play. Everybody could see it from the beginning, but she couldn't see it. And she insisted it wasn't there, that Mama Bear knew best. Nonsense. Okay, now let's get to the real horror, which is best laid out and exemplified in a very comprehensive piece that appeared in the Atlantic Monthly. I guess it's the Atlantic magazine now, because it's no longer a monthly, of course. We don't have any monthlies anymore. We just have things appearing all the time. But this one was scheduled for the November issue, so I guess it is a monthly. But I didn't want to wait until November. We've published it early on our website because of its urgency. Subscribers to the print edition can expect to receive the issue in mid-October. This is a story by Barton Gelman. It's Gelman as opposed to Gelman. Only one N on the end. And the headline is "The Election That Could Break America." And that's what the title of this live stream, that's where the title of this live stream comes from. The title of it, of course, is "Will America Break?" So, I've got it on the screen for you. I'm sharing it. And he starts off, "There's a cohort of close observers of our presidential elections, scholars and lawyers and political strategists, who find themselves in the uneasy position of intelligence analysts in the months before 9/11. As November 3rd approaches, their screens are blinking red, alight with warnings that the political system does not know how to absorb. They see the obvious signs that we all see, but they also know subtle things that most of us do not. Something dangerous has hove into view, and the nation is lurching into its path. The danger is not merely that the 2020 election will bring discord. Those who fear something worse take turbulence and controversy for granted. The coronavirus pandemic, a reckless incumbent, a deluge of mail-in ballots, a vandalized postal service, a resurgent effort to suppress votes, and a trainload of lawsuits are bearing down on the nation's creaky electoral machinery." It's only one thing I disagree with in that statement. He could have referred to a fascist incumbent. That would have been entirely justified. But let us go on. "Something has to give, and many things will when the time comes for casting, canvassing, and certifying the ballots. Anything is possible, including a landslide that leaves no doubt on election night. But even if one side takes a commanding early lead, tabulation and litigation of the overtime count, millions of mail-in and provisional ballots, could keep the outcome unsettled for days or weeks." Then there's a video accompanying the story. I've given you the link in the description. You can go there and play the video, okay, if you like. But this was an interview, okay, with Adrienne LaFrance about what could happen if the vote is close. And that was live today, actually. Going on with the article, though, "If we are lucky, this fraught and dysfunctional election cycle will reach a conventional stopping point in time to meet crucial deadlines in December and January. The contest will be decided with sufficient authority that the losing candidate will be forced to yield. Collectively, we will have made our choice, a messy one, no doubt, but clear enough to arm the president-elect with a mandate to govern. As a nation, we have never failed to clear that bar, but in this election year of plague and recession and catastrophized politics, the mechanisms of decision are at meaningful risk of breaking down. Close students of election law and procedure are warning that conditions are ripe for a constitutional crisis that would leave the nation without an authoritative result. We have no fail-safe against that calamity, thus the blinking red lights." Quote, "We could well see a protracted post-election struggle in the courts and the streets if the results are close," says Richard L. Hasen, a professor at the University of California, Irvine School of Law, and the author of a recent book called Election Meltdown. Quote, "The kind of election meltdown we could see would be much worse than 2000's Bush v. Gore case," unquote. There are a lot of people, including Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, who have misconceived the nature of the threat. They frame it as a concern, unthinkable for presidents past, that Trump might refuse to vacate the Oval Office if he loses. They generally conclude, as Biden has, that in that event the proper authorities, quote, will escort him from the White House with great dispatch. The worst case, however, is not that Trump rejects the election outcome. If Trump sheds all restraint and if his Republican allies play the parts, I'm sorry, I skipped down a little too far. It's not that Trump rejects the election outcome. The worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him. That's what he's aiming for now, doing whatever he can to prevent a decisive outcome against him so he can cast doubt on the outcome. If Trump sheds all restraint, and if his Republican allies play the parts he assigns them, he could obstruct the emergence of a legally unambiguous victory for Biden in the Electoral College and then in Congress. He could prevent the formation of consensus about whether there is any outcome at all. He could seize on that uncertainty to hold on to power. Trump's state and national legal teams are already laying the groundwork for post-election maneuvers that would circumvent the results of the vote count in battleground states. Ambiguities in the Constitution and logic bombs in the Electoral Count Act make it possible to extend the dispute all the way to Inauguration Day, which would bring the nation to a precipice. The 20th Amendment is crystal clear that the president's term in office, quote, shall end, unquote, at noon on January 20th, but two men could show up to be sworn in. One of them would arrive with all the tools and power of the presidency already in hand. Quote, we are not prepared for this at all, Julian Zelizer, a Princeton professor of history and public affairs, told me. And maybe it's Julian Zelizer. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Quote, we talk about it, some worry about it, and we imagine what it would be, but few people have actual answers to what happens if the machinery of democracy is used to prevent a legitimate resolution to the election. 19 summers ago, when counterterrorism analysts warned of a coming attack by Al-Qaeda, they can only guess at a date. This year, if election analysts are right, we know when the trouble is likely to come. Call it the interregnum, the interval from election day to the next president's swearing in. It is a temporal no man's land between the presidency of Donald Trump and an uncertain successor, a second term for Trump or a first for Biden. The transfer of power we usually take for granted has several intermediate steps, and they are fragile. The interregnum comprises 79 days, carefully bounded by law. There is, for example, quote, the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, this year, December 14th, when the electors meet in all 50 states and the District of Columbia to cast their ballots for the president. Quote, the third day of January, when the newly elected Congress is seated. And, quote, the sixth day of January, when the House and Senate meet jointly for a formal count of the electoral vote. In most of our modern elections, these have been pro forma milestones, irrelevant to the outcome. This year, they may not be. Our Constitution does not secure the peaceful transition of power, but rather presupposes it. The legal scholar Lawrence Douglas wrote in a recent book titled simply, Will He Go? ? The interregnum we're about to enter will be accomplished by what Douglas, who teaches at Amherst, calls a, quote, perfect storm, unquote, of adverse conditions. We cannot turn away from that storm. On November 3rd, we sail toward its center mass. If we emerge without trauma, it will not be an unbreakable ship that has saved us. Let us not hedge about one thing. Donald Trump may win or lose, but he will never concede. Not under any circumstance, not during the interregnum, and not afterward. If compelled in the end to vacate his office, Trump will insist from exile, as long as he draws breath, that the contest was rigged. Trump's invincible commitment to this stance will be the most important fact about the coming interregnum. It will deform the proceedings from beginning to end. We have not experienced anything like it before. Maybe you hesitate. Is it a fact that if Trump loses, he will reject the defeat, come what may? Do we know that? Technically, you feel obliged to point out the proposition is framed in the future conditional, and prophecy is no man's gift, and so forth, with all due respect. That is pedophagy. We know this man. We cannot afford to pretend. Trump's behavior and declared intent leave no room to suppose that he will accept the public's verdict if the vote is going against him. He lies prodigiously to manipulate events, to secure advantage, to dodge accountability, and to ward off injury to his pride. An election produces the perfect but distillate of all those motives. Pathology may exert the strongest influence on Trump's choices during the interregnum. Well-supported arguments, some of them in this magazine, have made the case that Trump fits the diagnostic criteria for psychopathy and narcissism. Either disorder, by its medical definition, would render him all but incapable of accepting defeat. Conventional commentary has trouble facing this issue squarely. Journalists and opinion makers feel obliged to add disclaimers when asking, quote, what if, unquote, Trump loses and refuses to concede, quote, oh, the scenarios all seem far-fetched, unquote, but Politico wrote, quoting a source who compared them to science fiction. Former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid, writing in The Atlantic in February, could not bring herself to treat the risk as real. Quote, that a president would defy the results of an election has long been unthinkable. It is now, if not an actual possibility, at the very least something Trump supporters joke about, unquote. But Trump supporters aren't the only people who think extra-constitutional thoughts aloud. Trump has been asked directly during both his campaign and the last whether he will respect the election results. He left his options brazenly open. What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time, I'll keep you in suspense, okay, unquote, he said to moderator Chris Wallace in the third presidential debate of 2016. Wallace took another crack at him in an interview for Fox News this past July, quote, I have to see, quote unquote, said Trump. Look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no. How will he decide when the time comes? Trump has answered that, actually, at a rally in Delaware, Ohio, in the closing days of the 2016 campaign. He began his performance with a signal of breaking news, quote, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make a major announcement today. I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters and to all the people of the United States that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election, unquote. He paused, then made three sharp thrusts of his forefinger to punctuate the next words. Quote again, if I win, unquote. Only then did he stretch his lips in a simulacrum of a smile. The question is not strictly hypothetical. Trump's respect for the ballot box has already been tested. In 2016, with the presidency in hand, having won the Electoral College, Trump boldly rejected the certified tallies that showed he had lost the popular vote by a margin of 2,868,692. He claimed, baselessly, but not coincidentally, that at least 3 million undocumented immigrants had cast fraudulent votes for Hillary Clinton. All of which is to say, there is no version of the interregnum in which Trump congratulates Biden on his victory. He has told us so. Quote, the only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election, unquote, Trump said at the Republican National Convention on August 24th. Unless he wins a bona fide victory in the Electoral College, Trump's refusal to concede, his mere denial of defeat will have cascading effects. And don't forget, just this week, he said to to a reporter who works for a Fox affiliate in Wisconsin, when asked, will you commit to leaving office to non-violently leaving office, to leaving office in a non-violent way, if the election should go against you. I'm sorry, I've already forgotten the quote, even though I gave it myself one day ago, okay, in a progressive shortcake. Okay, I did. But he said something to that effect. He would not commit to leaving office in a non-violent way. That's the way he answered that particular question. So he's told us that if he loses, he will not leave in a non-violent way. That he would not commit at this time to saying to his supporters, okay, it's all over. We have to do this in a non-violent way. He told us he's not going to do anything to discourage violence. He told us that, okay, already. Just this week. We'll be getting back to this later. Unless he wins a bona fide victory in the Electoral College, Trump's refusal to concede, his mere denial of defeat will have cascading effects. The ritual that marks an election's end took its contemporary form in 1896. On the Thursday evening after polls closed that year, unwelcome news reached the Democratic presidential nominee, William Jennings Bryan. The dispatch from Senator James Kennedy Jones, the chair of the DNC, informed him that sufficient was known to make my defeat certain, unquote. Bryan recalled in a memoir. He composed a telegram to his Republican opponent, Senator McKinley, William McKinley. Quote, Senator Jones has just informed me that the returns indicate your election, and I hasten to extend my congratulations, unquote, Bryan wrote. Quote, we have submitted the issue to the American people, and their will is law. After Bryan, concession became a civic duty performed by telegram or telephone call and then by public speech. Al Smith brought the concession speech to radio in 1928, and it migrated to television soon afterward. Like other rituals, concessions have developed a liturgy. The defeated candidate comes out first. He thanks supporters, declares that their cause will live on, and acknowledges that the other side has prevailed. The victor begins his own remarks by honoring the surrender. Concessions employ a form of words that linguists call performative speech. The words do not describe or announce an act. The words themselves are the act. Quote, the concession speech then is not merely a report of an election result or an admission of defeat, the political scientist Paul E. Corcoran has written. Quote again, it is a constitutive enactment of the new president's authority, unquote. Trump is going to deny that constitutive enactment to Joe Biden should Joe Biden be the winner in the contest. Make no mistake about that. That's what's going to happen. In actual war, not the political kind, concession is optional. The winning side may take by force, but the losing side refuses to surrender. If the weaker party will not sue for peace, its ramparts may be breached, its headquarters razed, and its leaders taken captive or put to death. There are places in the world where political combat still ends that way, but not here. The loser's concession is therefore hard to replace. So then, But Gelman moves into the 2000 election, okay, and points out that Al Gore conceded to Bush on election night, then withdrew his concession and fought a recount battle in Florida till the Supreme Court shut it down. It is commonly said the 5-4 ruling decided the contest, but that's not quite right. The court handed down its ruling in Bush v. Gore on December 12th, 6 days before the Electoral College would convene and weeks before Congress would certify the results. Even with canvassing halted in Florida, Gore had the constitutional means to fight on, and some observers urged him to do so. If he had brought the dispute to Congress, he would have held high ground as the Senate's presiding officer. In other words, he could have made rulings in the Senate that would have benefited him and his ticket. Not until Gore addressed the nation on December 13th, the day after the court's decision, did the contest truly end. Speaking as a man with unexpended ammunition, Gore laid down his arms, quote, "I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College," he said, and quote again, "And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession, unquote. We have no precedent or procedure to end this election if Biden seems to carry the Electoral College, but Trump refuses to concede. We will have to invent one. Trump is, by some measures, a weak authoritarian. He has the mouth, but not the muscle to work his will with assurance. Trump denounced Special Counsel Mueller, but couldn't fire him. He accused his foes of treason, but couldn't jail them. He has bent the bureaucracy and flouted the law, but not broken free altogether of their restraints. A proper despot would not risk the inconvenience of losing an election. He would fix his victory in advance, avoiding the need to overturn an incorrect outcome. Trump cannot do that. But he's not powerless to skew the proceedings, first on election day and then during the interregnum. He could disrupt the vote count when it's going badly, and if that does not work, try to bypass it altogether. On election day, Trump and his allies can begin by suppressing the Biden vote. There is no truth to be found in dancing around this point either. Trump does not want black people to vote. He said as much in 2017 on Martin Luther King Day, no less, to a voting group co-founded by King, according to a recording leaked to Politico. He does not want young people or poor people to vote. He believes with reason that he is less likely to win re-election if turnout is high at the polls. This is not a both sides phenomenon. In present-day politics, we have one party that consistently seeks advantage in depriving the other party's adherents of the right to vote. But under a year ago, Justin Clark gave a closed-door talk in Wisconsin to a select audience of Republican lawyers. He thought he was speaking privately, but someone had brought a recording device. He had a lot to say about election day operations, or, quote, EDO, unquote. At the time, Clark was a senior lieutenant with Trump's re-election campaign. In July, he was promoted to deputy campaign manager. Quote, Wisconsin's a state that's going to tip this one way or the other, so it makes EDO really, really, really important, unquote, he said. He put the mission bluntly, quote, traditionally, it's always been Republicans suppressing the vote. But Democrats, voters are all in one part of the state. So let's start playing offense a little bit. And that's what you're going to see in 2020. That's what's going to be markedly different. It's going to be a much bigger program, a much more aggressive program, a much better funded program, and we're going to need all the help we can get. Clark later claimed his remarks had been misconstrued, but his explanation made no sense in context. Of all the favorable signs for Trump's election day operations, Clark explained, quote, first and foremost, the consent decree is gone, unquote. He was referring to a court order forbidding Republican operatives from using any of a long list of voter purging and intimidation techniques. The expiration of that order was a, quote, huge deal, unquote, Clark said. His audience of lawyers knew what he meant. The 2020 presidential election will be the first in 40 years to take place without a federal judge requiring the RNC to seek approval in advance for, quote, any ballot security, unquote, operations at the polls. In 2018, a federal judge allowed the consent decree to expire, ruling that the plaintiffs had no proofs of recent violations by Republicans. The consent decree, by this logic, was not needed because it worked. The order had its origins in the New Jersey gubernatorial election of 1981, according to district court's opinion in DNC versus the RNC. The RNC allegedly tried to intimidate voters by hiring off-duty law enforcement officers as members of a, quote, national ballot security task force, unquote. Some of them armed and carrying two-way radios. According to the plaintiffs, they stopped and questioned voters in minority neighborhoods, blocked voters from entering the polls, forcibly restrained poll workers, challenged people's eligibility to vote, warned of criminal charges for casting an illegal ballot, and generally did their best to frighten voters away from the polls. The power of these methods rely on well-founded fears among people of color about contact with police. I would argue fears that are even more prevalent now in the light of what we've been going through. Going back to the article, this year with the judge no longer watching, the Republicans are recruiting 50,000 volunteers in 15 contested states to monitor polling places and challenge voters they deem suspicious looking. Trump called in to Fox News on August 20th to tell Sean Hannity, quote, we're going to have sheriffs, we're going to have law enforcement, and we're going to have, hopefully, United States attorneys, unquote, to keep close watch on the polls. For the first time in decades, according to Clark, Republicans are free to combat voter fraud in, quote, places that are run by Democrats, unquote. He might have added, I'm free to facilitate voting fraud in places run by Republicans, right? Voter fraud is a fictitious threat to the outcome of elections, a pretext that Republicans use to thwart or discard the ballots of likely opponents. An authoritative report by the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan think tank, calculated the rate of voter fraud in 3 elections at about between 0.0003%, and I remind you, that is 0.000003, because you have to, if it's a percent, you have to divide it by 100 to get the decimal, and 0.0025%. Another investigation from Justin Levitt at Loyola Law School turned up 31 credible allegations of voter impersonation out of more than 1 million votes cast in the United States from 2000 to 2014. Judge and voting rights cases have made comparable findings of facts. Nonetheless, Republicans and their allies have litigated scores of cases in the name of preventing fraud in this year's election. State by state, they have sought with some success to purge voter rolls, tighten rules on provisional votes, uphold voter identification requirements, ban the use of ballot drop boxes, reduce eligibility to vote by mail, discard mail-in ballots with technical flaws, and outlaw the counting of ballots that are postmarked by Election Day but arrive afterward. The intent and effort is to throw away votes in large numbers. These legal maneuvers are drawn from an old Republican playbook. What's different during this cycle, aside from the ferocity of the efforts, is to focus on voting by mail. The president has mounted a relentless assault on postal balloting at the exact moment when the coronavirus pandemic is driving tens of millions of voters to embrace it. Then he goes into surveys and what the surveys have shown about the fact, surveys have shown that a much greater percentage of Republicans are planning to vote in person than Democrats who are planning to vote by mail. He's called the mail-in voting fraudulent. He said, quote, "It's very dangerous for our country," unquote. He said it's a catastrophe, quote unquote, and also, quote, he said, "It's the greatest rigged election in history," unquote. He's carried out a propaganda campaign for months now against mail-in voting. And of course, we now have reports that the Postal Service, the government's most popular agency, was besieged from within by Louis DeJoy, Trump's new Postmaster General. And we've had that happening, and we've covered that here. It's all been going on. If there were doubts about where Trump stood on changes to the post office, he resolved them in an August 12th news conference. Democrats were negotiating for a $25 billion increase in postal funding and additional $3.6 billion in election assistance to states. He said, Trump said, quote, "They don't have the money to do the universal mail-in voting, so therefore they can't do it, I guess," unquote, he said. And then, quote again, "It's very simple. How are they going to do it if they don't have the money to do it?" Unquote. What are we to make of all this? His hostility to voting by mail is a reflection of his belief that more voting is bad for him in general. Democrats, he said on Fox and Friends at the end of March, want levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. That's a feature, not a bug. Some Republicans see Trump's vendetta. I said that, not the author. Some Republicans see Trump's vendetta as self-defeating. Quote, "It is to me appears entirely irrational," said Jeff Timmer, a former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. And quote again, "The Trump campaign and RNC and by fiat, their state party organization, are engaging in suppressing their own voter turnout, including Republican seniors who have voted by mail for years. But Trump's crusade against voting by mail is a strategically sound expression of his plan for the interregnum. The president is not actually trying to prevent mail-in balloting altogether, which he has no means to do. He's discrediting the practice and starving it of resources, signaling his supporters to vote in person and preparing the ground for post-election night plans to contest the results. It is the strategy of a man who expects to be outvoted and means to hobble the count." So it goes on in this vein for some time, but I have run out of time to continue to relate this because I have to go on to other things. But I urge you to read the whole thing. It's a really great article, extremely well researched. So what he talks about, in this part of it, is the likely blue shift, is what they're calling it. There is something of a chance and perhaps a likelihood that on election day, that in early voting and election day voting alone, that the advantage will fall to Donald Trump. Then people are expecting a blue shift because supposedly more Democrats will be voting by mail. So the so-called the blue shift will be a shift towards Democrats as the counting wears on in succeeding days. At this point, Trump has said already that if there's a victory for himself, on election day, or he seems to be ahead, on election day, that he's then going to claim victory, on election day, and he's going to try to claim that the blue shift is fraudulent because mail voting is fraudulent. He's following the propaganda campaign of months and months and months and saying uh, and drawing the conclusion, okay, on election day, that the blue shift, okay, is illegitimate because those votes were fraudulent because mail votes are fraudulent, as I've been telling you all for 6 months. Well, could a landslide spare us conflict in the interregnum? In theory, yes, but the odds are not promising, says the article. It's hard to imagine a Trump lead so immense on election night that it places him out of Biden's reach, unless the swing states manage to count most of their mail-in ballots that night, which will be all but impossible for some of them. The expectation of a blue shift that will keep Biden fighting on. A really big Biden lead on election night, on the other hand, could leave Trump without plausible hope of catching up. If this happens, we may see it first in Florida. But this scenario is awfully optimistic for Biden, considering the GOP advantage among in-person voters. And in any case, Trump will not concede a defeat. This early in the interregnum, he will have practical options to keep the contest alive. Both parties are bracing for a torrent of emergency motions in state and federal courts. They have already been skirmishing from courthouse to courthouse. Mail-in ballots will still have plenty of flaws for Trump's lawyers to seize upon. Voting by mail is more complicated than voting in person. Technical errors are commonplace at each state. If voters supply a new address or if they write a different version of the name, for example, by shortening Benjamin to Ben, or if their signature has changed over the years, or if they print their name on the signature line, or if they fail to seal the ballot inside an inner security envelope, their votes may not count. With in-person voting, a poll worker in the precinct can resolve small errors like this, for instance, by directing a voter to the correct signature line, but people voting by mail may have no opportunity to address them. During the primaries this spring, Republican lawyers did dry runs for the November vote at county election offices around the country. An internal memo prepared by J. Matthew Wolf for the Pennsylvania Republican Party in June reported on one such exercise. Wolf, along with another Republican lawyer and member of the Trump campaign, watched closely, but did not intervene as election commissioners in Philadelphia canvassed mail-in and provisional votes. Wolf cataloged imperfections, taking note of objections that his party could have raised. There were missing signatures and partial signatures and signatures placed in the wrong spot. There were names on the inner security envelopes, which are supposed to be unmarked, and ballots without security envelopes at all. Some envelopes arrived, quote, without a postmark or with an illegible postmark. Wolf wrote, watch for postmarks to become the hanging chads of 2020. Some voters wrote their birth date where a signature date actually belonged, and others put down an impossible date, like a date after the primary election. Some of the commissioner's decisions were clear violations of the direction in and language of the election code, Wolf wrote. He recommended that, quote, someone connected with the party review each application and each mail ballot envelope in November. That is exactly the plan. Legal teams on both sides are planning for simultaneous litigation on the scale of Florida, the 2000 election in multiple battleground states. My money would be on Texas, Georgia, and Florida to be trouble spots, said Myrna Perez, the director of voting rights, came elections at the Brennan Center. There are endless happenstances in any election for lawyers to exploit. In Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, not far from Wolf's Philadelphia experiment, the county Republican committee gathered surveillance-style photographs of reportedly suspicious goings-on in the ballot box during the primary. In one sequence, a county employee is described as placing unsecured ballots in the trunk of a car. In another, a security guard is said to be, quote, disconnecting the generator, which supplies power to the security cameras, unquote. The photos could mean anything. It's impossible to tell out of context, but they're exactly the kind of ersatz evidence that is sure to go viral in the early days of the interregnum. The electoral combat will not confine itself to the courtroom. The local election judges can expect to be named and doxxed and pilloried as agents of George Soros or Antifa. Aggressive crowds of self-proclaimed ballot guardians will be spoiling to reenact, quote, the Brooks Brothers riot, unquote, of the Bush versus Gore Florida recount. when demonstrators paid by the Bush campaign staged a violent protest that physically prevented canvassers from completing a recount in Miami-Dade County. Things like this have already happened, albeit on a smaller scale than we can expect in November. With Trump, we must also ask, what might a ruthless incumbent do that has never been tried before? Suppose that caravans of Trump supporters adorned in Second Amendment accessories converge on big city polling places on Election Day. They have come, they say, to investigate reports on social media voter fraud. Counter-protesters arrive, fistfights break out, shots are fired, and voters flee or cannot reach the polls. Then suppose the president declares an emergency. Federal personnel in battle dress staged nearby in advance, move in to restore law and order and secure the balloting. Amid ongoing clashes, they stay to monitor the canvass. They close the streets that lead to the polls. They take custody of uncounted ballots in order to preserve evidence of fraud. Quote, the president can't cancel the election, but what if he says, quote, we're in an emergency, we're shutting down this area for a period of time because of the violence taking place, unquote, says Norm Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute. If you're on Trump's camp and heedless of boundaries, he said, quote, what I would expect is you're not going to do one of two things of these things. You'll do as many as you can, unquote. There are variations of the nightmare. Well, this goes on and on, of course. And then he says, this is speculation, of course, but none of these scenarios is far removed from things the president has already done or threatened to do. Trump dispatched the National Guard to Washington, D.C., and sent Department of Homeland Security forces to Portland, Oregon, and Seattle during summertime protests for racial justice on the slender pretext of protecting federal buildings. He just issued, by the way, an executive order designating certain cities, okay, as anarchist cities, okay, and they were New York, Portland, and Seattle, okay, were anarchist cities. Some people on Twitter tweeted the murder rates in a variety, okay, of cities, and there were a number of cities in red states that came out way, way greater and way, way in advance than the murder rates in New York City and Portland and Seattle, okay, in these tweets. There was no comparison. And yet, these other cities, which are in red states, were in no way designated as anarchist cities, okay, or anarchy zones. I forget what the exact term is here. He said he might invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 and, quote, deploy the United States military to Democrat-run cities in order to protect, quote, life and property. The federal government has little basis to intercede during elections, which are largely governed by state law and administered by about 10,500 local jurisdictions, but no one familiar with Attorney General Bill Barr's view of presidential power should doubt that he can find authority for Trump, which every day that passes after November 3rd, the president and his allies can hammer home the message that the legitimate tabulation is over and the Democrats are refusing to honor the results. Trump has been flogging this horse already for months. In July, he tweeted, must know election results on the night of the election, not days, months, or even years later. Does it matter what Trump says? It is tempting to liken a vote count to the score at a sporting event. The losing coach can bellyache all he likes, but when the umpire makes the call, the game is over. An important thing to know about the interregnum is that there's no umpire. No umpire. No singular authority can decide the context and lay it to rest. There is a series of lesser officiants, each confined in jurisdiction, entangled in opaque rules. Trump's strategy for this phase of the interregnum will be a play for time as much as a concerted effort to squelch the count and disqualify Biden voters. The courts may eventually weigh in, but by then, the form of decision may already have moved elsewhere, such as into the streets. The interregnum allots 35 days for the count and its attendant lawsuits to be resolved. On the 36th day, December 8th, an important deadline arrives. At this stage, the actual tabulation of the vote becomes less salient to the outcome. That sounds as though it can't be right, but it is. The combatants, especially Trump, will now shift their attention to the appointment of presidential electors. December 8th is known as the safe harbor deadline for appointing the 538 men and women who make up the Electoral College. The elections do not meet until 6 days later, December 14th, but each state must appoint them by the safe harbor date to guarantee that Congress will accept their credentials. The controlling statute says that if, quote, any controversy or contest, unquote, remains after that, then Congress will decide which electors, if any, may cast the state's ballots for president. We're accustomed to choosing electors by popular vote, but nothing in the Constitution says it has to be that way. Article 2 provides each state shall appoint electors in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Since the late 19th century, every state has ceded the decision to its voters. Even so, the Supreme Court affirmed in Bush v. Gore, a state can take back the power to appoint electors. How and when a state may do so has not been tested for well over a century. Trump may test this. According to sources in the Republican Party, at the state and national levels, the Trump campaign is discussing contingency plans to bypass election results and appoint loyal electors in battleground states where Republicans hold the legislative majority. With a justification based on claims of rampant fraud, Trump would ask state legislators to set aside the popular vote and exercise their power to choose a slate of electors directly. The longer Trump succeeds in keeping the vote in count in doubt, the more pressure the legislators will feel to act before the safe harbor deadline expires. To a modern democratic sensibility, discarding the popular vote for partisan gain looks uncomfortably like a coup, whatever license may be found for it in law. Would Republicans find that position disturbing enough to resist? Would they cede the election before resorting to such a ploy? Trump's base would exact a high price for that betrayal, and by this point, party officials would be invested in a narrative of fraud. The Trump campaign legal advisor I spoke with told me the push to appoint electors would be framed in terms of protecting the people's will. Once committed to the position the overtime count has been rigged, the advisor said state lawmakers will want to judge for themselves what the voters intended. State legislatures will say, quote, all right, we've been given this constitutional power. We don't think the results of our own state are accurate, so here's our slate of electors that we think properly reflect the results of our state, unquote, the advisor said. Democrats, he added, have exposed themselves to this stratagem by creating the conditions for a lengthy overtime. Quote, if you have this notion, unquote, the advisor said, quote, that ballots can come in for I don't know how many days, in some states a week, 10 days, and that onslaught of ballots just gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So pick your poison. Is it worse to have electors named by legislators or to have votes received by election day, unquote. When The Atlantic asked the Trump campaign about plans to circumvent the vote and appoint electors who are loyal and about other strategies discussed in the article, the deputy national press secretary did not directly answer the question. Quote, it's outrageous that President Trump and his team are being villainized for upholding the rule of law and transparently fighting for a free and fair election, Thea McDonald said in an email. And quote again, the mainstream media are giving the Democrats a free pass for their attempts to completely uproot the system and throw our election into chaos, unquote. Trump is fighting for a trustworthy election, she wrote, quote, in any argument otherwise the conspiracy theory intended to muddy the waters. In Pennsylvania, 3 Republican leaders told me they had already discussed the direct appointment of electors among themselves, and one said he had discussed it with Trump's national campaign. Quote, I mentioned to them, and I hope they're thinking about it too. Lawrence Tabas, the Pennsylvania Republican Party's chairman, told me, quote again, I just don't think this is the right time to be discussing these strategies and approaches, But the direct appointment of electors is one of the options. It's one of the available legal options set forth in the Constitution, unquote. He added that everyone's preference is to get a swift and accurate count. If the process, though, is flawed and has significant flaws, our public may lose faith and confidence, unquote, in the election's integrity. And there's more of this kind of pettifoggery. But what it amounts to is that people, that the Republicans don't want to count votes that have to be counted late because their votes that are mailed in, and the states don't allow them to be counted until Election Day. Republicans control both the legislative chambers in the 6 most closely contested battleground states. Of those, Arizona and Florida have Republican governors too. In Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the governors are Democrats. Foley, the Ohio State election scholar, has mapped the ripple effects if Republican legislatures were to appoint Trump electors in defiance of the vote. In states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, the Democratic governors would respond by certifying the official count, a routine exercise of their authority, and they would argue that legislatures could not lawfully choose different electors after the vote had taken place. Their certificates of ascertainment, quote unquote, dispatched to the National Archives would say that their states had appointed electors committed to Biden. Each competing set of electors would have the imprimatur of one branch of state government. In Arizona, Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, who oversees the election, is a Democrat. She could assert her own power to certify the voting results and forward a slate of Biden electors. Even in Florida, which has a unified Republican role, electors pledged to Biden could meet and certify their own votes in hope of triggering a, quote, controversy or contest, unquote, that would leave their state's outcome to Congress. Much the same thing almost happened during the Florida recount ballot of 2000. Then Gore's chief lawyer, Ron Klain, responded by booking a room in the old Florida Capitol building for Democratic electors to cast rival ballots for Gore. Only Gore's concession, 5 days before the Electoral College vote, actually mooted that particular plan. And this goes on and on. There's a scenario where rival slates of electors could transmit some ballots to the seat of the government of the United States directed to the President and the Senate. The next move would belong to Vice President Mike Pence, who in this case would be the President of the Senate, as Gore would have been in 2000 if he had continued to contest it. This would be a genuine constitutional crisis, the first but not the last of the interregnum. Quote, then we get thrown into a world where anything could happen, unquote. 2 men are claiming the presidency. The next occasion to settle the matter is more than 3 weeks away. January 6th comes just after the new Congress is sworn in. Control of the Senate will be crucial to the presidency now. Pence, as president of the Senate, would hold in his hands 2 conflicting electoral certificates from each of the several swing states. The 12th Amendment says only this about what happens next. The presidents of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the vote shall then be counted. Note the passive voice. Who does the counting? Which certificates are counted? The Trump team would take the position that constitutional language leaves these questions to the vice president. This means that Pence has the unilateral power to announce his own reelection and a second term for Trump. And the Democrats and legal scholars would denounce the self-dealing and point out that Congress filled the gaps in the 12th Amendment with the Electoral Count Act, which provides for instructions for how to resolve this dispute. Trouble with the instructions is that they're widely considered, in Foley's words, to be, quote, convoluted and impenetrable, quote, confusing and ugly, unquote, unquote, one of the strangest pieces of statutory language ever enacted by Congress, unquote. This goes on and on and on with the scenario. I urge you to read the whole thing. What it amounts to is we have a potential, so many things can go wrong in so many ways. There's so many ways. It's just, okay, incredible. Okay, it could lead to Pelosi being sworn in as president, but provided she's the Speaker of the House, okay, in the new Congress. I hope to God she's not the Speaker of the House and that someone else might be sworn in then. But what if the Speaker of the House, okay, is a person who was not born here? What would happen then? I mean, what happens if the Speaker of the new House turns out to be Jayapal? I believe, according to the Constitution, she can be the Speaker of the House. However, according to the Constitution, she cannot be the President of the United States. She's unqualified. She wasn't born here. That's another problem, not considered in this particular scenario. Anyway, I cannot go through the rest of this, but the point should be made. We are facing total chaos if we rely on mail-in voting. The thing to do to not rely on mail-in voting is to either do in-person voting on the day of, okay, or early voting in states that allow this. Instead of planning to mail-in vote, take your mail-in votes as a last resort if you want your vote to count. And what about the danger of encountering COVID? That is going to largely depend on your state. The reason why I say this is because your state may facilitate mask wearing and social distancing and proper precautions at the polls so that lines are orderly and properly social distanced. And if early voting is allowed, then things can be done in a very safe way. We've already gone to vote here in this state, because early voting has started, in this state. Now, there are reports, that in Virginia, in Fairfax County, the lines were long. There 4 hours, people were waiting for 4 hours. It was really terrible. But things were handled in a very orderly way. Now, that was last Friday. By this Wednesday, the crowds had calmed down. And Bonnie and I were able to go over there and actually vote by curbside, in a highly orderly way, with really no risk to ourselves. No greater risk anyway, less risk than we take in going to the grocery store when we have to go shopping for food. So we certainly felt safe. We're sure we didn't contract any COVID. Of course, we won't know for a couple of weeks, but it's highly unlikely we did. We took our usual precautions. We sanitized our hands afterwards. We did everything that you're supposed to do. We were masked, of course. The poll workers who took care of the curbside voting were masked. Everything was very orderly. It was done in a very civic-minded way. We did not have to contend with any Trumpsters. I think that's probably too hard for them to do because they're planning on being there, on election day. But with early voting, you can't get 50,000 poll watchers every single day between now and the end, of early voting. So if you engage in early voting, that can be a defense against this. That can be a defense against it. So, okay, I wanted to make that clear. But I'm not finished, okay, for tonight. I am not finished. Okay, I've got some more that I want to cover, and that I'm going to try to cover as rapidly as I possibly can. So let me share the screen with something that some of you may have been waiting for, specifically some coverage of Bernie Sanders' speech today. So I saw the speech, of course. Monty and I saw the speech at 1. It was covered in an article by Jake Johnson, Common Dreams, warning a U.S. democracy under threat, quote, like never before. Sanders outlines plan to stop Trump's authoritarian takeover. Now, Bernie Sanders on Thursday delivered a speech warning President Donald Trump is going to poses an existential threat to U.S. Democracy, and that his refusal to commit to a peaceful transition to power or transition of power poses an existential threat to our democracy. And Bernie said, this is not just an election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. This is an election between Donald Trump and democracy, and democracy must win. Of course, I think Bernie is right about that. But the question is, how are we going to get democracy to win? Bernie also said, but today under Donald Trump, you have a president who has little respect for our Constitution or the rule of law. But today, quote again, that peaceful transition of power, the bedrock of American democracy, is being threatened like never before. Bernie went on. The speech was very good. It was very clear. And he highlighted, he pointed out that Trump has said that if he loses, it's rigged, because the only way he can lose, is if it's rigged. And if it's rigged, then he is not leaving office. Heads I win, tails you lose. In other words, in Trump's mind, there is no conceivable way that he should leave office, unquote. And just 24 hours ago, Sanders continued, Trump became, quote, the first president in the history of the country to refuse to commit to a peaceful transition of power if he loses the election, unquote. Let us be very clear. There is nothing in our Constitution or in our laws that gives Donald Trump the privilege of deciding whether or not he will step aside if he loses. In the United States, the president does not determine who can or cannot vote and what ballots will be counted. Watch the senator's full speech. It's there, of course. After sketching out a possible scenario in which Trump declares victory in the election by baselessly deeming mail-in ballots fraudulent, Sanders outlined a number of steps he said will be necessary in the struggle to preserve our democracy. First, we have to have by far the largest voter turnout in American history, and that people vote as early as possible. He's saying as early as possible. So he's endorsing early voting as opposed to a vote by mail. Let's be clear. The largest voter turnout, if it's vote by mail, is not necessarily going to secure our democracy, because Trump is going to contend the mail-in votes are fraudulent. Bernie also said, as someone who's strongly supporting Joe Biden, let's be clear, a landslide victory for Biden will make it virtually impossible for Trump to deny the results in as our best means for defending democracy, and that certainly is true. Second, with the pandemic and a massive increase in mail-in voting, state legislatures must take immediate action now to allow mail-in votes to be counted before Election Day as they come in. If the states do allow for that, it would be great, but the reality is that unless the states are controlled by Democrats, they're not going to take that immediate action. If the states are controlled by Republicans, they're going to want to try to force people to either engage in early voting or come out to the polls on election day, even if it means endangering their health. The Republicans are not at all hesitant to endanger people's health. In fact, 32 states allow for the counting or processing of absentee ballots, verifying signatures, for example, before Election Day. All states should do the same. The faster all ballots are counted, the less window there is for chaos and conspiracy theories. That's what Bernie says. Third, the news media needs to prepare the American people to understand there is no longer a single election day, and that it's very possible we may not know the results on November 3rd. Yes, we better prepare people for that, while doing everything we can to make sure the results are known on November 3rd. Fourth, social media companies must finally get their act together and stop people from using their tools to spread disinformation and to threaten and harass election officials. Well, I hope the social media companies act in accordance with what Bernie is saying here, but I also have to say good luck in trying to get them to do that. Since they profit from this stuff, they're unlikely to do it. Fifth, in the Congress and in the state legislatures, hearings must be held as soon as possible to explain to the public how the election day process and the days that follow will be handled. As we count every vote and prevent voter intimidation, everything possible must be done to prevent chaos, disinformation, and even violence. Again, the question is, will Republican states or swing states where control of the government is divided, will they do this? Will they try to provide for a fair election? Or will they try to set the stage for Donald Trump to try to steal the election by claiming fraud? I think we all know the answer to that question. Lastly, and most importantly, the American people, no matter what their political persuasion, must make it clear that American democracy will not be destroyed. But how can we make that clear? As far as I can see, the only way to make that clear is that when we have states that won't pass provisions to allow early counting or processing of the absentee ballots, or states that will not allow early voting, or states that will not safeguard the polls for people who want to come and vote, on election day, that if we're involved in those states and facing those states, the only way we can make it clear that American democracy will not be destroyed in those states is for people to go into the streets before Election Day and to pressure the state legislatures in those states to secure the elections and prevent fraud of the kind that Trump will commit by suppressing the votes, by delegitimizing the mail-in votes. Quote, regardless of what Donald Trump wants, the Vermont Center concluded, quote, the American people will preserve democracy in our country. From your lips to God's ears, Bernie. I certainly hope so. I have the same hope. And here's Bernie's full speech, which is there. You can read it there. And of course, the video is also there. So it was an excellent speech. Bernie did, a very, very good job. But of course, with all of the twists and turns of the Atlantic article commentary, that we went through, this gets very, very risky if one way or another we can't produce a landslide for Biden by Election Day. Here's just one quote, from Bernie's speech, I want to call attention to. In July, Trump used false claims of voter fraud to propose delaying this year's election, which he does not have the power to do. This was so outrageous that Stephen Calabrese, the co-founder of the Conservative Federalist Society, wrote that it was, quote, grounds for the president's immediate impeachment again by the House of Representatives and his removal from office by the Senate, unquote. Now, I find that interesting because why is it not grounds for the president's immediate impeachment again by the House of Representatives and his removal from office by the Senate when he said just yesterday that he would not commit to the peaceful transfer of power? Those are grounds for the president's immediate impeachment again. That's a lot worse than false claims of voter fraud. Someone who will not commit to a peaceful transfer of power following an election has no right to compete in that election. Those should be grounds for disqualification. Saying something like that, refusing to commit, should be grounds for disqualification. Trump should be disqualified because he won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power. He has no right to even run. But the only way to stop him from running at this point is to impeach him and convict him in the Senate and prevent him from ever holding high office in the United States again. In my view, that should be done right now because he won't commit to the peaceful transfer of power. Why do we have elections? So we can have a peaceful transfer of power. That's what they're about. So that we can correct errors by removing the people who are in error. So that we can learn. So that we can get better as a country. So that we can adapt to changing conditions. But Trump will not allow that. He's preparing and has been preparing for months and months and months. He's been in the act of trying to fix this election. Not so that he will be declared the outright winner, but so the election will be delegitimized and he can say, therefore, I should be able to stay as president for reasons of continuity. What we need is continuity. Bernie says, despite what Donald Trump says, voting by mail is not a new or dangerous idea. Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Utah conduct their elections almost entirely by mail. California, Nevada, New Jersey, the District of Columbia, and my state of Vermont have pledged to mail ballots to all registered voters for the upcoming election. And many other states are making it easier to vote by mail. Trump himself, as well as members of his administration, have repeatedly voted by mail. Members of the U.S. military have regularly voted by mail since the 1800s. Given the significant increase in mail-in ballots, why, you might ask, are Trump and his allies trying to attack the integrity of our vote-by-mail system? The answer is simple. A number of studies have shown that for whatever reason, Republicans are more likely to vote in person, while Democrats are more likely to use mail-in ballots. So, I wanted to go over that for you and direct your attention to it. I still have two more things that I want to cover, that I think are important. There was an article by Julia Conley on September 23rd, Common Dreams, quote, "Don't agonize, organize. Groups urge mass mobilization to thwart Trump GOP plot to sow chaos and steal the election And this article comes right out of the Gelman article in the Atlantic as the motivating factor for formulating a contingency plan. He talks about the Republican Party having meetings, putting together contingency plans to attack the legitimacy of the election. I wonder what the American people think about that. I wonder what they think about that. That what we're talking about here is the Republican Party meeting together to undermine the integrity of the election and call the elections into question. And they're deliberately doing this, trying to cloud things. And what is the appointment of a replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg about at this point, from Trump's point of view? He has told us he wants an extra justice there to rule for him when a lot of the disputes from the campaign go to the courts. He wants to have the fifth in a 5-4 vote because he doesn't trust John Roberts. He thinks John Roberts will go over to the liberal side of the court for a vote like that in order to protect the integrity of our democracy. So he wants a fifth vote to overrule John Roberts. That's what he wants. So I recommend that article to you. Then finally, there's another article which appeared in Waging Nonviolence, and I thought this was a most interesting piece. I'm going to share it with you. I promise this is the last thing that I will undertake before I turn to your comments, and I thank you for your indulgence here. I am giving this my best. There were so many things to cover on this. It was very hard to do, even in an in-depth show of normal length. So this is called 10 Things You Need to Know to Stop a Coup. This is by Daniel Hunter. It's from Waging Nonviolence, and it was done on September 18th, 2020. It starts, we have a president who's openly said he might not respect the outcome, of our election. Well, I'll skip the introduction. The author is part of an effort called Choose Democracy, which is prepping people for the possibility of a coup. So you probably want to Google them. They're actually choosedemocracy.us. Okay. And they're saying the best way to stop a coup is to not have one. Have a handbook called Hold the Line, a guide to defending democracy. And there are 10 things here I'm going to talk about. 1, don't expect the results on election night. So there it is. The Blue Shift is talking about the fact, that election night will be fraught. 2, do call it a coup. One reason to use the language of a coup is that people know it's wrong and a violation of democratic norms, even if they're not familiar with the exact definition of a coup. Language like election tampering or voter suppression signal deterioration of the democratic process. But if we get ourselves into a coup situation like where Trump just won't go, we need to help people help our country move into a psychic break. We know it's a coup if the government, quote, stops counting votes, as they did in 2000, declares someone a winner who didn't get the most votes, as they did in 2000, or allows someone to stay in power who didn't win the election, as they did in 2000. Yes, 2000 was a coup. It was a coup. We didn't recognize it as such, but it was a coup, and it led into the disaster of the Iraq War. It led us into disaster of ruinous foreign wars, of the expenditure of $3 trillion, of a huge loss of life, not so much among ourselves, okay, but among people in foreign countries that we attacked because the president was bent on war. It led to the abuse of civil liberties. It led to the Patriot Act. It led in an indirect way to the very election of Donald Trump himself, though that wasn't the only factor, okay, in his election. A lot of it started back then because we tolerated that coup where the election was stolen from Al Gore. Anyway, going on. These are sensible red lines that people can grasp right away and that the majority of Americans continue to believe in. People who do power grabs always claim they're doing it to save democracy or claim they know the, quote, real, unquote, election results. So this doesn't have to look like a military coup with one leader ordering the opposition to get arrested. If any of those three principles are violated, we have to declare loudly and strongly this is a coup. 3, know that coups have been stopped by regular folks. Coup attempts have happened all over the world, and over half have failed. That's because coups are hard to orchestrate. They are a violation of norms that require quick seizure of multiple levels of institutions with the claim they are the rightful heir. Coups tend to fail when government institutions like elections are trusted. There is an active citizenry and other nations are ready to become involved. The role of citizenry is crucial. That's because during the period right after a coup attempt, when a new government is claiming it is the real government, all the institutions have to decide who to listen to. A failed coup in Germany in 1920 gives an example. The population felt beaten down by defeat in World War I and high unemployment. But by the way, today we feel beaten down by a terrible economy, and of course, with the cause of the terrible economy and the cause of so many deaths due to the COVID virus, that has beat us down. We have to recognize that we are beat down to some degree by these events that have been mismanaged by this very administration. Right-wing nationalists organized a coup, to go on with the article, got the help of a few generals to seize government buildings. The deposed government fled, but ordered all citizens to obey them. No enterprise must work as long as the military dictatorship reigns, they declared. Widespread violent resistance, nonviolent resistance quickly began. Printers refused to print the new government's newspapers. Civil servants refused to carry out any orders from the coup, and leaflets calling for an end to the coup were spread by airplane and by hand. There's a story of the coup leader wandering up and down the corridors looking in vain for a secretary to type up his proclamations. The acts of resistance grew, and eventually the democratic government, which still had grave problems, was returned to power. The moments after a coup are moments for heroism amongst the general population. It's how we make democracy real. 4, be ready to act quickly and not alone. Typically, power grabs are organized in secret and launched suddenly. But this coup we're talking about here is not necessarily being launched in secret. It seems to be a slow-motion coup, which Trump began to organize back last March and April even. Most campaigns that defeat coups do so in days. The Soviet Union in 1991 took 3 days. France in 1961 took 4 days. And Bolivia in 1978 took 16 days to defeat a coup. It's rare for any country's leaders to publicly admit they might not respect the results of. There's some good news in that, because people who stop coups rarely have the chance to get training, warning, or preparation. In that way, we're ahead of the game. A group of DC insiders called the Transition Integrity Project ran multiple simulations, such as what might happen if Biden wins by a slim margin, or if Trump simply declares victory when there's no clear winner. In every situation, they concluded that a show of numbers in the streets may be decisive, but regular people make the difference. We have to realize, if we put people into the streets in D.C. as a result of this, which I'm certain we should do in nonviolent protest, the government will make every attempt to put down those nonviolent protests with the DHS troops and the U.S. Marshals that were used before in militarized dress and with military-style equipment, and people will be hurt and perhaps even killed, because this administration, as part of their coup, will take very strong action. At that point, it will be up to General Milley to make the decision as to whether he intends to defend the Constitution and to uphold his oath and take clear action against people conducting illegal operations against peaceful protesters. He's going to have to make that decision. It's not enough for him to say, I can't be partisan. This is not partisan. This is about the Constitution. The Constitution provides the right for people to peacefully and lawfully assemble and to nonviolently resist. And General Milley and the military have to be prepared to fulfill their oaths of office. To start preparing, talk to at least 5 people who would go into the streets with you. The safest way to take the streets is with people you know and trust. Talk to people you know in civil service and various roles about how they could non-comply with coup attempts. Use this time to get yourself ready to act. Focus on widely shared democratic values, not on individuals. In Argentina in 1987, the coup got started when an Air Force major, resenting attempts to democratize the military and bring it under civilian control, organized hundreds of soldiers at his base. While the civilian government tried to quietly negotiate a settlement, people took to the streets against the government's pleading. 500 regular citizens marched to the base with the slogan, "Long live democracy, Argentina, Argentina." They could have spent time attacking the major. Instead, they were appealing to their fellow citizens to choose democracy. The major tried to keep them away with a tank, but the protesters entered the base anyway, and he knew that opening fire on nonviolent civilians would cause him to lose more credibility. Soon, 400,000 people took to the streets in Buenos Aires to rally in opposition to the coup. This gave strength to the civilian government, which had largely been absent. Civic organizations, the Catholic Church, business groups, and labor unions united under a pledge to, quote, support in all ways possible the Constitution, the normal development of the institutions of government and democracy as the only viable way of life. The coup plotters lost their legitimacy and soon surrendered. The approach is different than protesters going in the street with a list of grievances against a vilified leader. Instead, it's exalting widely shared core democratic values. In our project, we use the language of, quote, choosing democracy, unquote. This affirms another finding from research on anti-coups, because coups are an attack on the current institution. Loyalists, okay, to the traditional way, who may never join other movement causes, are open to joining actions in the street. That's if we make the invitation about democratic values they can connect with. 6, convince people not to freeze or just go along. Imagine at your job a corrupt boss gets fired and a new one is brought in. Instead of leaving, your old boss says, I'm still in charge, do what I say. Okay? But then a bunch of her coworkers say, quote, we only take orders from the old boss, unquote. At that point, doubt arises. That doubt is how coups succeed. Enough people freeze. Even when only a few people go along with the coup and act as though that's normal, people may reluctantly accept it as inevitable. In all the research on preventing coups, there's one common theme. People stop doing what the coup plotters tell them to do. In Germany, from military commanders to secretaries, they refused to obey the orders of the coup. In Mali, they called a nationwide strike. In Sudan, protesters shut down government-supported radio stations and occupied the airport runways. In Venezuela, all shops were closed. This is very different than mass marches at the Capitol or street protests shutting down intersections. It's not about protest, but about getting people to reassert core values, like showing up at elected officials' offices to get them to agree to honor election results. And it's not about single points of action like marches in D.C., but instead actions like mass strikes from youth and students refusing to go to work or school until all votes are counted. Coups are not a time to just watch and wait until someone else figures it out. No matter who you are, you can be a part of choosing democracy. Commit to actions that represent rule of law, stability, and nonviolence. Okay, I'm not going to read this. I'm going to let you go to the article, okay, and read it because it's getting very, very late. Number 8, yes, a coup can happen in the United States. Yeah, I believe it's already happened in 2000. It may be hard to imagine that a coup could happen in this country, but whenever there's an order to stop counting votes, we call it a coup. Even by the strictest definition of coups, there has been a militarized coup in the United States. In 1898, after Reconstruction in Wilmington, North Carolina, seeing the rise of a prosperous and successful black population, racists organized a coup. They gave rallying cries like, quote, we will never surrender to a ragged raffle of Negroes, even if we have to choke the Cape Fear River with carcasses. By the way, it seems right now we have come a little bit close to a coup in Michigan, where armed protesters from the right wing have gone into the legislature with their arms and shut it down so that it could not meet, okay, for a few days, and threatened the governor with violence also. You can see this in a number of places in the United States easily. In support of any coup that takes place, we're going to see this happen in a number of areas in the United States. We have to get ready for it. Despite a terror campaign before the election, black turnout was high, and a slate of black candidates was voted in. Black power was met with white supremacist violence, with white squads killing 30 to 300 people, including newly elected officials. Over 3,000 blacks fled this extreme violence, and the era of Jim Crow in North Carolina began. I had no idea that was as late as 1898. I mean, I thought that the Reconstruction period ended in 1876 to 1880 was all over by then. I had no idea that, I just was unfamiliar with the fact that there was a coup in North Carolina in 1898. That's amazing. Center in calm, not fear. That is number 9. It's scary to believe we're having to talk about a federal coup in the United States, and we know that fearful people are less likely to make good decisions. Let's aim for calm and avoid hyperbole. Be a reliable source by double-checking rumors and spreading high-quality facts. Sure, read social media, but spend some time, doing real things that ground you. Breathe deeply. Remember how you handled fear. Yeah, but remember that fear is the mind killer. And play out scenarios, but don't become captured by them. We're doing this to prepare, just in case. Number 10, prepare to deter a coup before the election. The best way to stop a coup is to never have one. People are doing lots of good work on issues of voting rights, urging turnout, stopping repression, uncovering fraud, and getting people to commit to democracy. That may be enough. Another way to prepare is to get people in the mindset of taking action so they don't freeze. The classic formulation of this is the, quote, if this, then that sort of model designed by the Pledge of Resistance. In that model, people prepare themselves for an action by saying, quote, if it comes to this bad thing, then I'll act, unquote. By signing a pledge before the crunch moment, you get a wider buy-in. In that spirit, Choose Democracy has created a pledge. We will vote. 1. 2. We will refuse to accept election results until all the votes are counted. We will non-violently take to the streets if a coup is attempted. 4. If we need to, we will shut down this country to protect the integrity of a democratic process. You can sign the pledge to Choose Democracy and join with folks across the political spectrum. These public commitments ahead of time increase the political cost of attempting a coup, because the best way to stop a coup is to deter it. So, those are the items I wanted to cover for today. I hope that you enjoyed this. I see that 12 of you are still here. I am quite willing to continue and go over your comments. Also, if you have any other questions, on Saturday, I'm going to have a Q&A. It will be Q&A on the progressive short takes for the week. I've now done 5. I've got a 6th that is pending. But I also have to tell you that I will take any questions on this in-depth show, as well. So here we are with comments starting at 9:54 p.m. For some reason, the early comments don't show up on here. I don't know why. And Avromano says, Evelina Pont, especially if birth rates keep dropping out due to COVID. Evelina says, Stephen DeVore, not like that everywhere. Used to be like that everywhere, though. Think we've evolved a little. No. Evelina says, no, 2020 is the real thing. And she says to Steve Wolfbrand, 2020 is the real thing, in caps. Steve DeVore says, I hope so, but it seems many haven't. But Bush's brother was the governor of Florida in Bush versus Gore. Yeah, even more important that, though, Catherine Harris was the Secretary of State in Florida, or the Attorney General. I forgot which. But she had custody over the votes, and she was manipulating things. And she was just as important in throwing the election to Bush as Jeb Bush was. Just as important. She was awful. And remember, in Florida this year, Who's the Attorney General or Secretary of State? Again, I forget which. Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi, a terrible Republican apparatchik and a partisan of Donald Trump. Steve Wolfbrand said it's going to get ugly on November 4th. It's going to be ugly on November 3rd. If armed people show up at the polls, it's going to be ugly on November 3rd. Alice Little says, I remember it well. I was in downtown Austin and was standing in front of the Jumbotrons. They announced Gore won. Bush was on his way to the Capitol gate to give his concession speech. A cold front swept through it, went from 80 to 40 and started raining. We waited and waited, but Bush never did come to the gate. They backed up those black SUVs and drove back to the governor's mansion. That, for me, was the day democracy died. The machine became obvious then. Steve says November 4th will be lucky. Evelina says, isn't it already? We haven't seen anything yet, I'm afraid. I agree. We haven't seen anything yet. I wonder what happens if we recruit veterans from the civilian population who are interested in free and fair elections, and they become our poll watchers, and they show up at the polls with their arms. What happens then? It's just something I wonder about. Stephen DeVore says, what scares me with that kid shooting these people was the support the cops gave him. It definitely seems there's a fascist streak running right down the middle of America. There always has been. Okay, it's not new. What's new is that the cops are enabling it now more than they ever did. They feel free to enable it because Trump is the president of the United States and because local authorities are not clamping down on them because the police unions are so strong. Alice Little says, volunteers my ass. Evelina Ponte says, Stephen DeVore, that was in the Northwest. Romano says, Stephen DeVore, too many Americans are authoritarians addicted to outrage. Evelina Ponte says, Romano, outrage, I think there's more apathy than anything. Steve Wolfbrand says, unfortunately, Trump is correct. Our elections are quite rigged. He will use this fact to stay in power. Welcome to ancient Rome. Well, they're rigged, but not in the way he wants to rig them. Steve DeVore says, still, he had a lot of support from all over the country. I've never seen anything like it. People were trying to grab the gun away from him, and he was shooting them point blank in the gut and chest. I know. Evelina says, doesn't seem that way, doesn't it? Especially with the awful backdrop of the fires. Evelina Ponte, I'm talking about fascist Donald Trump supporters. They're rabid with outrage, and Agal feeds it to them regularly. Romano says, yes, I agree. Evelina says, Romano, yes, I agree. Steve Wolfman says, yeah, I saw it. Very, very sad. Lives ended and ruined. Carmen Rena says, but I think it's more rage than outrage. Maybe there isn't a big difference. Those damn machines are easily hackable for a redshift and have always been. They were made that way. Steve DeVore says, I'm dropping my ballot off at the library. No U.S. mail for me. Yep, at the library. At the place you go for early voting. Right. Kay says, I'm dropping mine at the county elections office drop box. That's the way to do it. Alva says, imagine the crowds from South Park. Then perhaps you'll see what I mean. White, false fragility is outrage. Steve Wolfbrand says, a friend at work offered to help me build a ghost gun. They send you the parts online. You build it yourself in a half hour. No registration number, $450. Anyone can do this. Alice Little says, thought I got my ballot, but it's the application to get one. There's no address to mail it to. I guess the mailman knows. No, don't assume that. If you have the application, if you have early voting in Texas, in Austin, try to go to early voting. It will probably be safe there. Go masked. It will probably be like going to the grocery store. But I don't know. You have to investigate the conditions in Texas. Here, it was like that. Evelina says, Avro Romano, yes it is. Alice Little said, is that the 3D non-metal gun? Stephen Dewar says, I'm not going to be an election judge this year. It would be too hard on my body to sit there all day, and I feel horrible that I'm not. Kay says, laugh out loud. I doubt that, Alice. Steve says, send it to my house with a $20 bill, and I'll take care of it for you. Avril says, Evelina says, Avro Romano is thinking of real rage and a shitty standard of living. Steve Wolfman says, just take care of yourself. We need you around. Avril says, so is the joy just going to be let off the hook? I think that's going to depend on our election in part. Okay, in other words, if the Democrats control the two houses of Congress, and if Biden gets the presidency, no, DeJoy is not going to be let off the hook. He's going to be prosecuted. He's going to go to federal prison. He's going to be there for years. And Donald Trump is not any longer going to be able to protect him. Deborah Wilson says, K. Clark Ryan, yes, along with the deep state. Evelina says, Avro Romano was thinking of real rage and a low standard of living in rural areas. Alice, no, you're thinking of the 3D printer plastic gun that can be smuggled aboard a jetliner. Alvaro says, we're going to need real ninjas to take out dear leader Adolf Hitler. And Deborah Wilson says, and to boot, we have our favorite cookie cutter HRC directing Joe Biden not to respect his loss as well. Great bunch of goons we've got here. Well, actually, Biden should not accept the verdict on election night. If the mail-in ballots are still to come in, everybody thinks they're likely to be Democratic. So he should not be accepting defeat then. There's no way. Steve says, careful, you might get a knock on your door. Alvaro says, I doubt they even knock anymore. Evelina says, Avro Romano, good answer, laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand, no knock assassination warrant. And Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand, Steve, laugh out loud. I don't think it's a laughing matter. I mean, that was the warrant but for Breonna Taylor, wasn't it? A no-knock assassination warrant, right? Alvaro says, open Smart News and read Trump claimed he's going to send $200 cards to millions of seniors in the mails a week before the election. But it's not clear he can actually do it here. Stacey says, I think the states which don't allow pre-election day counting are mostly red. Yeah, probably, but, we got to win some red states, or certainly swing states. Some of them don't allow pre-election day counting either. Does Iowa allow pre-election day counting? And that's an interesting state, which is certainly tending towards the blue right now, contrary to expectations. Evelina says, I'm sure seniors could use it. I laugh out loud. Also, by the way, supposedly Biden's only a couple of points behind in Texas. He's threatening, in Texas. If the momentum shifts a bit, he's in line to acquire Texas. If he gets Texas, there's no way Trump can win. No way Trump can win. So, won't they try to rig it in Texas from now until the day of election in any way they can to try to get people to do only mail-in ballots, the people they want anyway? Evelina says, I'm sure seniors could use it, laugh out loud. Steve DeVore says, if I had any balls, I should do it myself. At this point, I have nothing to lose. Yes, you do. You have your life to lose, Stephen. Hang in there. Avro says, Republican voter registrations are up 41% over Democratic registrations in Florida. Are there 41% more Republicans who are registered in Florida, or are these the new registrations? And if so, how many Democratic registrations are there in Florida compared to Republican voter registrations. Steve Wolfbrand said, California is blue. I might vote Trump just to spite these suckers for cheating Bernie. Steve, I don't understand how that's going to spite them for cheating Bernie. In other words, if Biden is going to win heavily anyway, why would it matter to the Trump people? I mean, they're not going to be aware of your vote. I mean, the Trump people are not going to be aware of your vote. And the Democrats are not going to be aware, of your vote. Let me vote your conscience. If your conscience is Green Party in California, vote for the Green Party. Kay says, isn't going to hold a candle to the SS Medicare and Medicaid seniors will lose. Yep, Evelina Pont. I'm pointing out the measures he's willing to take to buy votes. Yep. Evelina says, Alvaro Romano votes a secret or no. Yeah, they're secret, but he figures if you give people $200, they'll vote for you. And it's not his money, is it? $200 is not his money. It's federal money. So he'll try to buy votes with federal money all the time, won't he? And Deborah Wilson says, Alvaro Romano and I heard they're young and non-college educated. And Alvaro says, am I wrong for sicking COVID on the corrupt, especially Barr, Pelosi, DeJoy, and the Tangerine tyrant? Well, I'm not going to say you're wrong. Stacy says, no, I wish daily they would all drop dead. Steve Wolfbrand said, what are you talking about? Things can always change. You are loved. The planet needs you. Don't even go there. Steve says, yeah, it's not good to wish that. We're better than that. No, we need each other. We got to stay around. Let them do that. We're having 80% humidity again tonight. The only good thing about that is that the COVID aerosols drop down quickly, so possibly less risk when voting. Jay says, not sure I'm better than that. They're existential threats to my progeny's well-being. And my progeny, too. Kay says, glad you and Bonnie could have that option. This backward state doesn't have an option close to that. Ohio sucks bad. Why should Virginia be better than Ohio? I mean, Ohio for so long, Ohio often voted for Democrats. Alvaro says, I splash bleach on my face and hands in packages after I go out for necessary provisions. Bleach on your face? No, not bleach on your face.
Hurt your eyes.
I mean, use alcohol, use soap and water. Soap and water is effective against COVID. Soap is very effective against COVID. The soap bubbles. Just wash with the bubbles. Bleach. Not your face. Don't use bleach. Chlorine is toxic. Alvo says, Steve Wolfbrand, I'd be dead then. Evelina says, soap and water is good. Kay says, finally found a couple cans of Lysol spray. Don't use Lysol on your face either. Yay, laugh out loud. Raskin and Schiff should be woodshedding with the best parliamentarians they can find up until and beyond Election Day. That's in the House. We're not talking about the House here. What we're talking about is the Senate. It's the Senate that has to block the new Supreme Court, the so-called justice that Trump is going to try to get in there. But one thing that Raskin and Schiff could maybe do is prevail upon Nancy Pelosi to impeach Trump again. It's very important to impeach Trump again and keep on impeaching Trump and Barr right up to and beyond Election Day. And the reason why is because when impeachment proceedings occur, they take priority over everything else. So they won't be able to confirm their new justice. And we can use up the time if Nancy Pelosi will use the weapons she has, but she won't use them. She's caving again. Shahed, she's caving again. Steve DeVore says, this cancer is doubling every 18 days or so. 2 separate doctors I've spoken with both say they believe it'll be after the first of the year. My platelets are already so low, there's no treatment that can be given to me without killing me quicker than the cancer. Thanks for saying so, but I'm a realist, even though there's a chance. I'm still looking maybe too much on the dark side. Still, I hope they're wrong. You have, right now, you have October, November, December. I'm telling you about something now. It may work. Okay, it may not work. I certainly don't know, but there are a lot of testimonials to that effect. Research of the Budwig diet and look for case testimonials for the kind of cancer you have at the Flaxseed Oil 2 website. And once you get those histories, then make a decision about whether you want to try that or not. 3 months is enough time for that to begin to take effect. It's not going to kill the cancer in 3 months, but it would start to reduce the size of the tumor. It would make you feel better. It has done that for many people who've had various kinds of cancer. Okay, now I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is just something for you to research and try. If they're telling you it's the beginning of the year and they have nothing they can do about it, then I don't see that you have anything to lose, Steve. So Evelina puts thumbs up. Kay says, cool. Steve Wolfbrand says, seriously, don't use bleach on your skin or inhale it. Use alcohol sanitizer instead. Bleach is only for laundry. Seriously, Alvaro, stop that shit now. Alvaro says, Donald Trump doesn't just think he's a president. He sees himself as a dictator. He spells it D-I-C-K space T-A-T-E-R. Kay says, feel your pain, Stephen. Lost my husband to stage 4 cancer a couple of years ago. Steve Wolfman, no, I'm addicted. Alpha says, try milk thistle supplements. It helps me a lot. I have cancer too. And so do I. I have prostate cancer. I've held it off now for more than 8 years. I'm into my 9th year. And they characterized it as Gleason 8. Okay, aggressive cancer. Okay, so great speech by Bernie today. Yeah, it brought home what blithering idiots both Biden and Trump are compared to Bernie. It really did. I mean, you have to ask yourself, who is the 78-year-old guy with all his faculties here? Alvaro says, we're just going to have to send Bonnie to whip DT's arse. Steve DeVore says, so sorry. Deborah Wilson says, Kay Clark Ryan, indeed. Kay says, thank you, Stephen. I'm very sorry, too. Steve Wolfman says, Stephen DeVore, I hope you have a miracle recovery. I suggest some magic mushrooms to show you that death is not to be feared, okay, or an end to anything. But also much love to you. Avromano says, like I said earlier, DT got Pelosi, or the Democrats rather, by the nuts, and he knows they won't act. No, he knows that Nancy Pelosi has no nuts, so he knows they won't act. Kay says, in my opinion, after the House impeaches the president, even if he is not removed, they should not be allowed to run for re-election again. We need some changes made. Well, that would require a change to the Constitution, because the Constitution doesn't work that way, of course. Steve DeVore says, do you have a source? I love me some shrooms. Deborah Wilson says, Congress is not doing crap. I heard per David Sirota. helpless, helpless, helpless act. Yes, they're playing the helpless act. Yes, that's what David Sirota has been saying. David Sirota is right. He's often right. He's one of the best commentators we have at present. Steve Wolfbrand said, he wasn't convicted, K, impeached. Just means he went to trial, K, in the Senate. Still, it means there should be changes made. Steve Wolfbrand said, the Midwest grows kits, calm, not affordable. Steve DeVore says, I think we must vote every Republican out of office to disband the party and write about them in history books. I've often felt that. I felt that for such a long time. What a useless bunch of crap they are. Kay says, I'm all for that, Stephen. Stephen DeVore says, it's a party of hate. They serve no positive purpose. Avril says, aren't they bad for the liver and kidneys? Kay says, I agree, Stephen. State hate and corruption. Stephen says, but where do I get the spores? Stacy Van Veen says, I recognized it as a coup, but the media quickly papered over it. W was an idiot goon. Trump's worse, a lot worse. Stephen DeVore says, honest, they're talking 47% for both Trump and Biden. Yeah, that's a national poll. I don't think their poll is among the best, and they're constantly spreading their polling news, and generally the MSNBC polls are not good polls. They're not of the quality of the Monmouth poll, the PPP poll, the Quinnipiac poll. Right now, those are probably the best polls. I don't think they're even as good as the Morning Consult poll. Kay says, our woods was full of wild mushrooms at our old house. Morels, yum. Steve Wolfman said, it's on the website where to get the spores. They recommend a source to get the spores. There's nothing illegal till the spores are activated. I grew my own in 30 days, and I'm going to order some more. Sure, it's illegal, but who gives a fuck if you do it for personal use? They don't have time to prosecute this. Alvaro Mano says, and the fascists will simply quarantine the entire nation to stop a dissent against the coming coup. Kay says, martial law, Alvaro. Alvaro says, Trump supporters don't give a flying fuck about democracy. They'll stand with the police, okay, and oppressors. They won't match with us. He says, march with us. She says, march with us. Correction. Kay says, Alvaro, his supporters are too stupid to know what that will mean for them, too. Alvaro, that's the problem. MAGAs will stand with them, not us. And racists will unite again in 2020. Kay says, be stocked up with beer, whatever you like, as in martial law. You can't buy any, just FYI. Housel says, wow, terrific crash, just got back in. Kay says, a lot of history in Wilmington, North Carolina when I lived there. I got a whole new education about it all, Alvaro says. Oh, speaking of wine, alcohol flattens blood platelets, which makes COVID worse for the person if they get infected. And Steve DeVore says, if you can't make it work, let me know. I can grow some shit and send it to you. Kay says, laugh out loud, honey, I'm ready for euthanasia at this point. Not much to live for in my life. Bonnie says, oh, no. Avril says, meaning the platelets get fatter and wider, which helps COVID-19 to infect more. The point is, you can sanitize with alcohol. And once you sanitize with alcohol, then the virus gets killed. The virus is killed by alcohol. Okay, so I don't know about the platelets, but the virus gets killed, okay, by alcohol. Novel says, spot on, Daniel Hunter, great reading and balance, Dr. Joe. Here we go. Deborah Wilson says, very sound advice. Don't freeze and allow the tyranny. Alice Little, I'm feeling you. I don't even want to be around in January if the Cheeto is. Steve DeVore says, please do. I have a bunch on my plate. But right now I don't have the time for that. Avril says, spot on, Daniel Hunter. Great reading and balance, Dr. Joe. Alice Little says, I'm glad people are finally seeing we have to fight this coup. I'm sad it's taking so long. I do hope it's not too late. Steve O'Brien said, fuck that coup. We would miss you terribly. No hurry to check out. But let's see how it turns out. If you need a few bucks, let me know. Okay, says, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that, but it's way past money at this point. I need security, and I'm on the edge every day. And Deborah Wilson says, Steve Wolfbrand, stay K. Things always get better. And Steve Wolfbrand says, direct message, the address. Kay says, I just want security in my old age. Things haven't gotten much better for me the last few years for sure. I'm not going anywhere, Steve. I have no way to anything like that anymore. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm here for you if you need me. Kay says, thank you so much, Steve. I worry about being homeless at some point. And Joe, do you think Nancy is going to prosecute Trump and really take him to task? No, I don't. Steve says, love this part when Doc reads the comments. Avril says, no, forgive me for interjecting. Avril says, same, puts thumbs up. Steve DeVore says, if you ever need to talk, I'm here too. Avril says, new registrations in Florida. Kay says, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. Yeah, just a new registration, but there's still more Democrats in Florida than there are Republicans, right? Right. I think that's true of Florida too. Alice Little says, Kay, I was in your exact spot in November of 2018. If you need help, I have some ideas, at least one. I did contact my representative, and he contacted the disability for me. That's a help. Kay says, thank you, Alice. I appreciate my friends I've made through this discussion group. Kay says, you guys are the very best. Okay, I love you all. Thank you, Kay. We love you too. Alvaro says, I tried granola with flaxseed oil, had digestive problems from hell. Who said anything about trying granola with flaxseed oil? I mean, the formula is for cottage cheese and flaxseed oil
2% cottage cheese.
and using a hand blender. It's low-fat cottage cheese, like 2%, and hand blender until the two mix. It's the mixture of the two that's critical. It changes the nature of both, and it releases oxygen to fight the cancer. That's what it's about. And you do that twice a day, once with ground the flax seeds the first time, freshly ground flax seeds, so the lignans are still fresh. They have to be ground on the spot. You have to eat it within 20 minutes, so the lignans still have their full power. Okay, so it's the mixture that counts. You have to follow the recipe laid out by Sandra Olson. Sandra Olson is the owner of that group, okay, the Flaxseed Oil 2 group. She has a video. She teaches you how to mix the flaxseed oil, okay, and the cottage cheese. There are so many cancer survivors in that group. Literally, there are thousands of them. Once more, what is the name of the cancer research on flaxseed called? Okay, this is called the Budwig diet, or the BUDWIG. Sometimes it's referred to as a protocol as well, okay? But okay, it was developed by Dr. Johanna Budwig, who was a nominee for the Nobel Prize 8 times because she was the discoverer, okay, of omega-3. She was a PhD in chemistry, but she treated cancer patients. Over the course of her life, she treated 1,000 cancer patients. She kept careful notes on them. She had something like a 92% cancer cure rate, she claimed. Okay. Now, there were no rigorous experiments that were done by her. She treated people, and her notes, okay, are clinical notes. Okay, and the cure rate, okay, is based on that. But if you go to the flaxseed oil 2 group, okay, there's uh, there's an email server group that used to be, okay, a Yahoo group. It's now transferred over to IO groups. Okay, it's one of the IO groups, but it also has a website. Okay, so you go to their website and you register for the group, and you get, okay, their emails. The archives, okay, are available to you. Case histories, testimonials, okay, are available to you. Lots and lots of debate, okay, among people. Lots and lots, okay, of information, often about the particular type of cancer you have. I know pancreatic cancer has some cases there. Uh, okay, there are a number of people who've had prostate cancer. There are breast cancer sufferers. Yeah, the Budwig diet. Yeah, Google, okay, the Budwig diet. Steve Wolfriend says, how much wood would a woodchuck of a woodchuck chuck would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck chuck wood? Oslo says, thank you for the name. I'm going to look that up. I do not get cancer screenings. I feel awful for you guys. I don't know what, okay, or if I have anything. Well, don't feel awful for me. I mean, I feel great. For my age and for my condition, my PSA is still fairly low. I've been treating it really primarily with diet. I was taking, okay, a medication for a while, which was good for about 3 years, but it then, okay, and turned into something that was called, okay, an agonist. Okay. And when it became, okay, an agonist, I had to stop using it, which I did. Now I'm waiting for another medication to get through a trial, but I've controlled this extremely well, okay, for 8 years, and I am in very good shape, okay, for my age, I think.
You're going to tell them how long we're going to live.
And Bonnie and I are going to live till we're 125. We've made a contract, okay, to do that. No. No.
What's the number?
Okay, I'll tell you just a minute. Okay, Kay says, I don't trust any polls anymore. That's a good idea. Avril says, it's a rather new report about alcohol and fat platelets relating to COVID. I'd be happy to see the link, Avril. That would be great. Stacy Van Veen says, drinking wine beats shoving a light up one's ass. Avril says, a light as in a flashlight. Trump was talking about drinking disinfectant and getting light into your interior while Burks squirmed in her chair. She did squirm in her chair. I saw that. Okay, no, Alice. It's cottage cheese, 2% cottage cheese, and flaxseed oil, extra virgin organic flaxseed oil. Those are mixed together, and then fresh ground flaxseed. Okay, in other words, after those two things are blended, okay, together, then some fresh ground flax seeds are folded in. Okay, if you're looking for the how to do this, in terms of the amount, okay, of cottage cheese, okay, and flaxseed, and so on. Go to the flaxseed oil 2 group and find the video from Sandra Olson, and she will demonstrate to you how it is done and the proportions that are supposed to be used. And she's very, very good, okay, at explaining it. And she has also the Budwig diet. She circulates a short statement of the diet that, okay, is very good. And there's an awful lot of advice on that site for how to use the diet, okay, what to do. And it's not simply just the formula, okay, the Budwig formula. There are lots of other things to do with it. It's a whole a lifestyle thing, okay. People practice it, okay, in different ways. You know, some people take on the whole lifestyle. Some people half the lifestyle, 2/3 of the lifestyle. It varies with the individuals, okay. But there are a lot of individuals who apparently have benefited from it or think that they have. Avril says that all these had, I'm sorry?
But we use it for breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, we use it for breakfast and for lunch, which is what you're supposed to do.
And then dinner.
Okay, and then we generally just have a regular dinner, but it's a dinner which is usually on the vegan side. Twice a week we have some fish and chicken for dinner, but 5 days a week, okay, it's vegan stuff, okay, for dinner. So, and we've given up, okay, on all red meat, okay, or anything like that. So all these had flaxseed oil, okay, and also granola for $1.69. I only had $2, so I tried it. Okay, I'll get flaxseeds whole, hopefully soon. Yeah, but you got to get the cottage cheese and the flaxseed oil. You use fairly large quantities of it per week. A 16-ounce bottle of flaxseed oil can be gotten for roughly $6 a bottle by mail order. This is extra virgin organic. Okay, and you mix that up with cottage cheese. As you know, the cottage cheese, okay, is fairly cheap. But I calculated that if you follow the diet correctly, that 1 bottle of the flaxseed oil will last you, if you use it, okay, in the proportions you're supposed to, it will last you for 6.4 days. So 30 days of the oil, roughly 30 days of the oil, okay, or 1 month of the oil will run about maybe $30 a month or $32 a month, something like that. I'm sorry. If you buy 5 bottles, yeah, it should cost $30 a month. And the 5 bottles will cost, okay, a whole month. So $30 a month, I think, okay, is not too bad. And then the cottage cheese, it'll probably be a container and a half, a large container of cottage cheese, okay, and a half. At Costco, that costs about $6.50. So you need that every week. So that costs another roughly $28 a month or something like that. Okay, then you have to add some fruit, okay, for breakfast, and some other vegan additions for lunch. So that's going to cost, okay, a little more. So for breakfast and lunch, the whole diet would probably cost less than $100 a month, maybe. Flaxseed oil. The flax seeds would bring up the cost a little, but altogether, it's not too expensive.
The flaxseed has to do with the ligands or
Oh, the flaxseed oil you buy has to be lignin-free. The reason why is you're going to add the lignans by grinding up the whole flax seeds. And you need to buy also organic flax seeds. What kind of amounts are we talking about? No. We're talking about a half a cup, okay, of the cottage cheese and a quarter cup of the flaxseed oil. And you mix those two together. Okay, that's a dose.
and about 2 tablespoons of flaxseed. Grind up
Is it 2 tablespoons or 2 teaspoons?
2 tablespoons.
2 tablespoons of flax seeds to grind up. There is a Facebook page called The Truth About Cancer that I have been checking out too. That's fine. I don't know what's on that page because I do my own research on cancer. Stacy says, I saw a blip on Guy ad earlier today, something about peptide. I will go search it out. A peptide?
Yeah.
What does this have to do with peptides? Anyway. Stacy says anti-neoplastin is Brzezinski's term for a group of urine-derived peptides. Peptide are derivatives and mixtures that Brzezinski named to use in his cancer treatment. God, I don't know the Brzezinski cancer treatment. Alice says, you guys look great, okay, from middle age to me. Which guys? If you're saying that I look great, okay, Bonnie looks great. But Bonnie says she's beautiful, and she is. But all I will say is that I am on the wrong side of 81, slipping fast down to 82. And I'm not going to give you any information about Bonnie. Alva says, Dr. Joe, have you ever heard about saw palmetto being good treatment of prostate cancer? Yeah. I heard about that, and I used to take saw palmetto that never did anything for me. It just was ineffective.
Yeah.
Okay, it didn't work. Okay, at all. What I did take that was effective for a while, but it got awfully expensive because the stuff was about $100 for a month's supply. Was something called, what is that called again? Okay, it's something that's made out of orange peel, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's called is now slipping my mind, but I'll look up the information for you, and if you remind me the next time I'm on, I will have the information.
Or send a link to you when you
Right.
send it.
I will send the link to you. Who is asking me for this information? It's Avro. But I am not friends with Avro. I am friends with Carmen. So I will send the information to Carmen Muniz. How's that? Kay says, I've said for many years that there will be help for AIDS before cancer as there is too much money made from cancer. Steve says, it's in my kidneys, lungs, glands, and my belly with my low platelet issue is why they can't treat it. So look into the Budwig diet. It might just be my only option. Yeah, it's not going to take effect immediately, but people are warned. There are some people who find that they do get very quick results, but for most people, you have to wait for 2 or 3 months to see any results, okay, at all. Okay, I was not actually taking it alone. I was taking it along with some medication. And the combined effects of the medication and the Budwig diet knocked the hell out of my PSA very, very strongly. I mean, my PSA was up to 28, which is really pretty high, and I was getting really rattled because it was shooting up there very, very fast. And I took the medication and started, on the Budwig diet just about the same time. And before you knew it, I was down to 1.13. Okay, and it stayed low, and then the medication, after about 3 years of use, it turned into what they call, an agonist, and it was driving my PSA up. So I had to go off it. And then, after I got off it, my PSA went down a little, and then it started stabilizing again. Bonnie is pointing to her watch, and it is almost 12 o'clock. So it looks like I'm almost done, too, with your comments. So look on Hannah's page to see about the diet. On Hannah's page? Oh, I'm not sure who Hannah is. Kay says, Scott started in his colon and spread to his brain. I took care of him as long as possible at home till he started having strikes, and then I was afraid for him. Strokes. So I sent him to hospice for Veterans Day weekend, and they wouldn't let him come back home as he was stroking out there. That must have been terrible for you, Kay. And terrible for Scott. He was stroking out there. That was November, and he died on January 8th. And that's a coincidence. January 8th is my birthday. Amazing coincidence. What are the chances? 1 out of 365. I'm surprised hemp oil isn't being pushed as a cure oil. Well, flaxseed oil was suggested specifically by Dr. Budwig because of her research into omega-3, and what she intended was that the cottage cheese and the flaxseed oil mixture would liberate the oxygen and send the oxygen to the cancer cells, because oxygen is fatal for cancer cells while being very good for normal cells. So that was her notion. And where she learned that was that she was a student of someone by the name of Otto Hahn, I think his name was, but he was a Nobel Prize winner who discovered that oxygen kills cancer. So that's where she learned that, by studying with him. She was German. She lived herself until she was, 94?
Yeah.
Or something like that. She died, at 94, and not from cancer. Steve DeVore says, that's doable. It's $100 to $150 a month. It would probably cost you a little more for dinners. I mean, I don't know how much you spend, on dinners per month, but it would cost you in that neighborhood for the Budwig formula part, of the diet, and other small things that you might add to it. Does Bonnie do the diet with you? Yes, she does, but she's had to interrupt it, for a little while because she got a virus, a couple of weeks ago, and she needed to go on what they call I think it's called the brat diet or something like that. But it was, specifically for treating the virus. But she's about to go back on the Budwig diet, probably. Yeah, in fact, she was on it for the first time today. She loves it, actually. She likes it very much. Al says, no way, on your age. She says, shocked. I am less than 3, she said. I think the number may show up on actual Facebook, but I'm looking at this through StreamYard, so it looks like it's less than 3. She said, shocked, I'm less than 3. Maybe she was saying, maybe Alice was saying she's less than 3. Kay says, funny thing was that Scott had cancer everywhere except his lungs, and he smoked Camels his whole life. A woman says, orange peel oil is used for termites around here. I already have the information about the butter diet already. I sent it to you. Yes, I sent it to you. But you don't have to email it again. I think that was someone asking for the info. Yeah, it was someone asking for that info. But you were asking for the other info about the other thing that I took and found effective that was based on the orange peel. That's something else. I don't know why it's slipped my mind, as to what it's called. I mean, I took it, for more than a year, and it was helpful in driving down my PSA. No question about that. It was helpful, but not as helpful as the Budwig diet, and not as helpful as the bicalutamide that I was taking for 3 years.
But everybody's different.
Yeah, everybody's different. Yeah, everybody's chemistry is different, so there are variations. That's why it's so hard to treat cancer. See, divorce says, I ate so little right now and I've lost so much weight. I haven't been 180 since I was 16 years old. My birthday is the 111. Alva says, I've heard oxygen makes cancer spread.
No.
Nope, it kills cancer. When it's delivered directly to the cells, it kills cancer. Stacy says, I'm a Gemini, married to a Capricorn. He's a January 6th. Yes, I'm a Capricorn too.
No cancer.
Okay, and Bonnie is Cancer.
With the giggle.
It's well known that Cancer and Capricorn match up very well,
Yeah.
as we have done. It's fortunate this diet, is not a lot of food. Actually, the Budwig diet is a lot of food. Okay, in other words, it recommends a lot of food besides just the Budwig formula. There are fruits, there are vegetables. If you ate everything that's recommended on the Budwig diet, you would be bursting full. I mean, we don't eat everything, that's recommended. Okay, as I told you, it's a lifestyle. Okay, and the lifestyle is primarily actually a vegan diet. Okay, except for the Budwig formula itself, which has the cottage cheese in it. Okay, but it's mostly a vegan diet. As it is, it's a vegetarian diet for those who fully observe. Dr. Budwig herself, though, didn't want to deprive her patients of going off meat completely. So she would serve them some fish for dinner at her clinics. So she allowed fish, but it's not on the official diet. In other words, that's an exception. That's allowed. And we're still on that exception. So it's mostly things like it's beans, it's lentils, it's grains, it's sauerkraut juice.
Yuck.
And Bonnie says yuck. It's, sauerkraut juice or kimchi if you like. Kimchi serves as well. If you grind up kimchi and make kimchi juice, first thing in the morning is sauerkraut juice or kimchi juice. We don't do that. We can't stand it. I could probably stand the kimchi juice. I don't know if I'd like the sauerkraut juice. So we start off with some mint tea usually in the morning. That's the first thing we take. Some people go for kumbashado in the morning. Alice says, I cannot stand fish. Laugh out loud. I do love a good cow. We have learned to love fish. We have become fish lovers. I used to be steak crazy. When Bonnie met me, I was eating 2.5 pounds of steak at a sitting. I wasn't getting fat. I was a fanatical steak and salad guy. I would eat huge quantities of steak and salad, and I wouldn't get fat.
You could eat a 3-pound steak and not get fat.
And Bonnie says I could eat a 3-pound steak and not get fat. Anyway, there's a lot of food on the Budwig diet, and I've been losing weight on it because I don't eat all the food that one can eat on it. What I do is I eat the formula, and I eat pretty much a vegan meal for dinner. And we eat the fish, and we snack on chocolate, which is allowed on the diet as long as it's sugar-free chocolate. We use 85% chocolate. Yeah. Okay, I got to say goodnight. Bonnie is waving at me. She's been waving goodnight at me. Yeah, the brat. Beef or banana, rice, applesauce, toast, Scorpio. Yeah, That's it. That's the type of diet. You can also have chicken soup, though, on the diet. And you can have chicken soup with the rice. And we've been doing it. We haven't been using the applesauce. Uh, but we learned from our doctor turmeric was good.
Mm-hmm.
So we make chicken soup with organic rice, with turmeric, and we season it with some scallions and some artichokes and stuff like that. Al says, mint juice, sauerkraut juice, yuck. I'm with Bonnie on that. I love fish. Thank you. Good night, all. Albert said, I had fish and coleslaw too today. Sauerkraut juice, yuck. I'm with Bonnie on that one. I love fish, but mostly when I catch it.
Yay.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to say good night.
Good night.
Good night. Apple cider vinegar and lieu of sauerkraut. Apple cider vinegar is okay. There's a mixture of apple cider vinegar and water a lot of people use on the diet too. My dad's birthday was on Xmas and he died January 10th, if I remember right. He died in 1986. Yeah, that's when my father died. Okay, in 1986. Not on January 10th, but he died in 1986. He was relatively young, 74, which I now consider to be actually relatively young. I hope it's relatively young. Cases, thank you. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a great night. I'll be back with a Q&A on Saturday. Thanks. And there'll be, I hope you've seen all the short takes so far this week. If you haven't, they're all on my page. 5 short takes so far, a 6th one coming up tomorrow. And Bonnie is pointing to my wine to drink my wine. And I'm ending the broadcast. Good night.